Hello everybody, welcome to this week's Myth of the Gym. This week we're looking at the myth that you need to start youth sports super young and stay in them and do as much as you can in one sport, specialize your entire life, and that will get you to the point where you'll be a super elite athlete on the back end. Now we've done a similar video to this, but for today's purposes, we're looking at some of the feedback and research that's come out of the 2026 Olympic Games just wrapped up, and where athletes were at for those games, who started really young, who didn't, and how that has set them up to be where they're at. So for today, we're looking at very baseline. If you want more information, please go dig into it. There's a lot of research coming out after these Olympics, and you can find it on Google, anywhere else you find your research. For our purposes, we're looking at whether or not it is great to start with the traditional, or not traditional, the current youth sports model, which is get your kids into a sport early, specialize them, and do that sport as much and often as you can with as little rest and recovery as possible for as long as they can manage. And hopefully that will turn them into a high-level elite athlete, maybe a professional athlete as they get older. Personally, I have not been a huge fan of this model, only because it leads to a lot of burnout that we see in the gym. Kids coming in who no longer want to play their sports, who don't have the courage to tell their parents. They tell us because we become their confidants in what we're doing here, and as they come in, they get comfortable with us. But they can't go home and tell mom and dad that they don't really want to play baseball anymore, and they've really hated it for the last 3 or 4 years. They'd like to do something else. Maybe they want to try out for track or soccer or whatever. But the parents feel like they've committed their time and effort into specializing in that sport, and if they restart now, their kid will be behind, and then they won't have success in the future. So it's kind of this interesting dichotomy of two sides of the coin. If you look at the research that's coming out of the Olympics now, they're saying that less than 30% of the athletes that made the Olympics in this last year, or in this last season, 2020 season, had any kind of youth specialization in that sport. Very few of them have actually come out with that. So less than 30% have come out or have noted that they had youth specialization in their sport. They've been doing it from a young age, and that's what set them up to be where they were. And they have had a sports program in that specific sport for a long period of time. The other 60%, so the other 2/3 of them, half of those 2/3, so another 30% of the whole, started somewhere around middle of the road. They were in their teens maybe, or a mid-level team, and they started there. They came out, tried out, started the sport, and they learned it from there, and they became successful and made it to the Olympics at that level. The other 30% started late, and they were late bloomers. Either they were late bloomers, didn't develop early, or they didn't find the sport that they loved and that they did in the Olympics and were super successful at until later in life. Maybe some of those sports you didn't find it until you were in your 20s or 30s. Just depends on where you're at, what sport that was. So if you're looking at this research and saying, okay, 60% of people who made it to the Olympics this year, at least 60%, so a good 2/3, were not specialized at a young age. Why is it that young age specialization is not more represented? How can this be the best option? Maybe it's not. I will say, because there's always a right road for everybody, it may be the right thing for you or for your child if that is what they want. But one of the big things that's come back from this research is that people had to have wanted it. They have to want to be there. If they feel like they're being forced to do it at any point, usually the return on that becomes poorer, and they'll start falling away from the sport, and they wind up having fewer benefits later on. They acquire more injuries, they have more problems. So you have to kind of figure this out as you go along. It might be a thing where they started in sports younger and then walked away from it for a while and then came back to that sport. You just have to kind of figure it out for yourself. But definitely kibosh on the myth that you have to start young to be successful. If that was the case, a high amount of people getting in the Olympics this year would have come from that sport specialization. And they haven't. It just doesn't work. So if it works for you, if it works for your kids, go for it. If you're looking for a better option, try something different. Try to put your kid in a couple different sports and then see if they can be benefited from those things in the sport that they really kind of love. The best thing you can do is find what is right for your kid.